Developing the knight here opens up several flexible pawn structures and prepares for castle quickly. Mirroring white's development, this knight's placement builds symmetry and prepares for central pawn advances or potential queenside play. Opening up the queen's diagonal, c4 immediately stakes a claim in the center and prepares a queenside expansion. Solidifying central influence, this pawn prepares to bolster d5, creating a robust queenside structure. Developing another knight here aims to establish central influence and prepare for d4, potentially opening lines. Challenging the center's symmetry, d5 instantly creates dynamic pawn tension and opens lines for piece development. Solidifying the center and preparing a tranquil development, white embraces a flexible pawn structure. Preparing to fianchetto the bishop here aims to control the long diagonal, eyeing white's queenside. Establishing central pawn presence now solidifies white's territorial claims. Developing the bishop to g7 solidifies black's fianchettoed structure, preparing for central action while keeping an eye on white's queenside expansion. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside castling, this bishop exchange aims to control the crucial dark squares and support a potential pawn advance. Securing the king within its fortress immediately allows for a more dynamic piece play, shifting focus to the queenside initiative. Reinforcing the central pawn chain and preparing to contest the d-file, a solidifying maneuver. Developing the knight to d7 offers flexibility, preparing to contest the center and potentially support. e5 pawn push while keeping its eye on the kingside. Positioning the queen here allows for smoother coordination of queenside pieces and prepares potential queenside expansion. Unlocking the e-file for piece activity now, but it does somewhat isolate the queen from the kingside. Opening the c-file now offers a dynamic challenge, potentially exposing white's queen to pressure as pieces develop. Recapturing opens the c-file for potential piece activity. Opening up the queenside allows your pieces to develop towards the center and creates potential for queenside expansion. Preparing to challenge white's central control with a timely b5 expansion, securing the queenside. Positioning the bishop to eye the d5 pawn strengthens white's central influence. Initiating queenside expansion, this pawn thrust aims to pry open avenues for the rook and gain vital territory against white's solid central structure. Reinforcing the central d-file, this piece prepares to contest black's queenside expansion by offering a strong rook outpost. Black gracefully develops the bishop, eyeing the long diagonal and preparing for potential pawn pushes or pressure on white's queenside structure. A bold thrust, this knight repositions to seize central influence and provoke pawn exchanges that might open lines towards black's king. Releasing the central tension clears lines, but be mindful of the now open diagonal for white's bishop. The pawn push opens the d-file for your rook and creates a passed pawn, a significant endgame asset. Reclaiming the central outpost with the knight, aiming to contest the d-file and prepare for pawn breaks. Initiating a pawn thrust on the kingside to seize more central territory and potentially open lines for the rooks. Challenging the e5 pawn with this pawn advance introduces immediate central confrontation, potentially opening lines and impacting the king's safety. Unleashing the passed pawn, this boldly advances, potentially dominating central space and isolating black's pieces. Reclaiming central influence, the knight eyes the outpost on c5, threatening to destabilize white's pawn chain. Unleashing a kingside assault, white sacrifices pawn structure for attacking potential, aiming to pry open lines against black's slightly passive setup. Ignoring the passed pawn's allure, black aggressively probes the queenside to disrupt white's coordination. Liberating the knight to an outpost, this maneuver aims to control crucial central squares and disrupt black's pawn structure. Liberating the knight from its cramped outpost suddenly clarifies black's attacking aspirations on the queenside. Recapturing the queen frees up the central pawn to advance, eyeing black's weakened kingside structure. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside creates immediate tactical fireworks. though it weakens the central pawn chain considerably. Targeting the weak bishop, this knight maneuver ignites a fight for crucial dark squares. Trading that bishop for a pawn sacrifices positional control on the king side, opening avenues for white's queen and rook. Cracking open the center with this pawn push invites tactical fireworks, potentially sacrificing material for initiative. Unleashing the rook to the open, file intensifies pressure on white's queenside pawn structure and prepares for potential piece exchanges. The knight retreats to avoid immediate confrontation, preserving its attacking potential while seeking a better square for the ensuing skirmish. Opening the g-file assaults the white king's security, creating immediate tactical opportunities and imbalances. Safeguarding the monarch, white initiates a critical pawn push, aiming to exploit black's exposed king and fractured pawn structure. Sacrificing the pawn opens lines, hoping to exploit the exposed king and create dynamic counterplay. Regaining material, white now eyes the weakened dark squares around black's king. Resurrecting the kingside attack, the pawn thrust aims to shatter white's central grip and open lines towards the monarch. Snapping back the pawn seizes initiative, exploiting the now exposed black king's precarious position and opening lines for attack. Unleashing the rook signifies a bold attempt to exploit the open files, aiming for queenside counterplay despite the king's compromised safety. Refocusing the queen to a more active attacking square, aiming to exploit the weakened kingside. Targeting the weak e4 pawn and opening lines toward the king offers dynamic counterplay. Reinforcing the king's sanctuary becomes paramount now, securing this vital defensive square. Introducing a queen check into the equation forces white's king into a precarious central position, setting up potential mating threats. Securing the king's retreat offers defensive breathing room amidst the unfolding storm on the queen side. Opening the king's defender invites immediate exposure. The rook now aims at the weakened queenside structure. Asserting dominion over the central files offers crucial counterplay against black's aggressive kingside play. Sacrificing the exchange opens crucial lines, aiming to dismantle the king's defenses. Recapturing the rook opens the f-file, potentially creating new attacking pathways towards black's weakened kingside. Seeking active counterplay, black endeavors to pry open white's king position with the queen. Unlocking the b-file after the exchange simplifies white's path to activity and eases pressure. Sacrificing a pawn to seize the open c-file and exploit the exposed white king offers a glimmer of hope in this otherwise difficult position. Asserting control over the open rook file after the exchange of queens solidifies white's central presence and prepares for potential pawn pushes. Seizing the open file, black aims to disrupt white's piece harmony and activate their rook. Suddenly, a royal chase begins, forcing the black king into a precarious position. A desperate attempt to activate the bishop, but the king remains exposed. Opening the d-file exploits black's uncastled king and forces a beneficial exchange. Hoping to reactivate the passed pawn's pressure, but white's control of the open files remains formidable. Liberating the bishop from its passive square, aiming to activate it on the open diagonal. Challenging the exposed king and disrupting white's rook's potential with an aggressive central thrust. Sacrificing material to expose the enemy monarch opens a decisive path. A desperate attempt to create a passed pawn, but the king's exposed position makes this incredibly risky. Reactivating the knight aims to support the rook's advance and potentially disrupt black's passed pawn.